She hit the gate with her shoulder and kept moving. Jasper Quinn heard the impact from inside the old monastery kitchen, a body slamming the iron-banded wood hard enough to rattle the hinges, and he was already reaching for the short blade he kept above the hearth when he yanked the door open and found her on the threshold, breathing like a horse run to ruin. One hand braced against the stone archway, and the other clutching a traveling cloak so soaked through with sea spray and autumn rain it hung off her like a pelt. She was enormous. That was the first thing he registered, which was almost absurd considering everything else about her that demanded attention. She stood at least a head and a half taller than him, shoulders broad and powerful beneath the ruined cloak, the kind of build that came from a life of serious physical consequence. Her skin was the color of river-deep jade, dark and luminous even soaked through, and her tusks short, elegantly curved, ivory pale caught the lantern light when she squared her jaw to look at him. Her eyes were the amber of old whiskey held up to firelight, ringed in dark lashes and absolutely furious. She wore a bride's traveling dress, or what remained of it. Fitted amber leather cinched tight at the waist with a wide copper-buckled belt, a laced bodice with copper eyelets that laced up from a deep-cut neckline to just below her collarbones, a skirt split at both sides for riding or running, and she had clearly been doing the latter. The hem was shredded at one corner. There was dried blood along her right forearm, not a deep wound, more like a long scrape taken at speed. The leather had been hand-tooled with clan markings, the kind of work that took weeks and announced status. It was the outfit of a woman who had been dressed for ceremony and had then decided, very deliberately, to become someone else's problem. He stood in the doorway with his blade still raised and a pot of willow bark tea cooling on the stone behind him. "I need shelter," she said. Her voice was low and raw, the accent of the southern Orc clans, crisp consonants and long vowels. "One night. I have coin." Jasper looked past her into the dark. The monastery of Crestholm sat on a cliff above the Chevrel Sea, 3 crumbling towers and a working south wing that he'd taken over as his base of operations 6 months ago, when the coastal villages needed a traveling healer badly enough to let one move into an abandoned religious house without too many questions. The road that wound up the cliffside was empty. The wind off the water was picking up hard. Below, somewhere in the dark, the sea was throwing itself against the rocks. He lowered the blade. "Come in." She did not thank him immediately. She stepped past him with a kind of coiled wariness, checking corners before she let herself breathe, and he noticed she was also checking exits. A woman who had learned to enter a room the way you entered enemy territory. "How far back?" he asked. She looked at him sharply. "What?" "Whoever you're running from." "How far back are they?" A pause. She hadn't expected him to be quick about it. "An hour, maybe 2. I took a cliff path, they won't know it." "How many?" 4 outriders, plus the groom's brother." She said the last 2 words with a particular flatness that communicated a great deal. "He's the one who will push. The outriders follow coin." Jasper went to the kitchen window and shuttered it from the inside. Then he moved to the south door and did the same. "Sit down before you fall down. There's tea. It tastes like bark because it is bark, but it'll stop the shaking." She sat. The stool creaked under her but held. He'd reinforced everything when he moved in. The old monastery furniture had been half-rotted, and she wrapped both hands around the clay mug he set in front of her with a kind of desperate gratitude she was working hard not to show. He put the blade back above the hearth. He was 31 years old, of middling height and lean build, with brown hair that needed cutting and hands that were always slightly stained from whatever compound he'd been mixing. He had a healer's hands, people said, meaning careful and sure, but he'd grown up on a working fishing boat before his mother's older sister had taken him in and taught him the herbalist trade, and he had also learned to read weather, to read water, and with some years of practice to read people. He read her as terrified but not broken, proud and working hard to protect the pride and in genuine danger. "My name is Jasper Quinn," he said. "I'm a traveling healer. I have been based here for about half a year. I treat the villages along the Chevrel coast. I am not affiliated with any clan, any lord, or anyone who might want to send you back wherever you came from." She looked at him across the mug. Murbul Bonecrusher. She said it like she was waiting to see if the name would make him flinch. He didn't. "That's a name with some weight to it." Something shifted almost imperceptibly at the corner of her mouth. "It was my grandfather's. I inherited it. He was considerably larger than me. He must have been remarkable." Jasper pulled out the other stool and sat. "How bad is the arm?" She looked down at the scrape as if she'd forgotten it. "Superficial." "I caught a branch. Let me look at it." She held it out, and he lit 2 more candles and cleaned and dressed the wound with efficient hands and no unnecessary commentary. She watched him work with those amber eyes, and he could feel her measuring him, the way people who had survived a lot of bad situations measured everything, continuously and without rest. "A healer," she said when he was tying off the dressing. "Yes. Living in a monastery on a cliff above the sea. The rent is extremely reasonable. No one else wanted it." He sat back. "Now, 1 night's shelter, I'm agreeing. But I need to know what I'm agreeing to, so tell me about the groom's brother. What is his name, and what will he actually do if he finds you here?" Murbul was quiet for a long moment. The fire in the hearth popped. The sea wind pushed against the shuttered windows with a sound like breathing. "His name is Vorok," she said. "He rides for Clan Ashbone. The marriage was arranged between my clan Bonecrusher, what's left of us, and Ashbone for land rights along the Greyville Plateau. I was to be the trade." She said it without apparent self-pity, but her jaw was tight. "I had no objection to the concept. I had a significant objection to the specific man. He is not a bad man in the ordinary sense. He is simply a man who owns things. He would have owned me. That I cannot endure. So you ran." On the morning of the ceremony, before the binding marks were drawn, she looked at him steadily. "Vorok will take this as a personal insult to his brother and to his clan. He is not wrong. It is a personal insult. But I would rather face his anger than spend my life as property." Jasper was quiet. He was a man who had learned to listen before he spoke, which was partly the healer's training and partly just his nature. He lived alone and had for some years, and he had found that living alone gave a person a very clear sense of what they would and would not accept from the world. "You can stay tonight," he said. "We'll figure out the rest in the morning." She looked at him as if she were waiting for the condition, the price, the thing he wanted. He got up and went to check the kettle. No condition came. She slept that night on the long stone bench in the refectory with a blanket he'd spared and her cloak balled under her head, and Jasper sat up for 2 more hours by the fire with his blade across his knees, listening to the road. No outriders came. Either she had misjudged her lead, or the cliff path had genuinely confused them. In the morning she was still there, sitting at the kitchen table with the cloak dried and spread across the back of the chair and her amber eyes on the door, and he made a hot grain porridge with dried saltfish and set a bowl in front of her without being asked, and she ate with the focused efficiency of someone who hadn't eaten since yesterday and was not going to make a scene about it. "I should move on," she said when the bowl was empty. "Where?" She didn't answer right away. "North," he offered. "Across the Greyville. Back to whatever's left of Bonecrusher territory." "Bonecrusher territory," she said, "is 3 mud-walled steadings and a graveyard. My grandfather built something. My father spent it. What remains is mostly gravestones and debt, which is why I was being traded to Ashbone in the first place." She turned the empty bowl in her hands. "There is nowhere to go north that they won't find me in a fortnight. South, the free ports. I have 47 copper pieces and a traveling dress." Jasper leaned on the work table. Outside, the sea was making its enormous gray morning noise, and the light through the high slit windows was that flat coastal light that was neither warm nor cold. "There is a traveling chest of medical supplies, a room, and food here, and Vorok doesn't know you're in this specific building." She looked at him. "Stay," he said. "Not forever. Just until you've a plan with more than wishful thinking in it. You don't know me. I know you're running from something and you have nowhere to go and 47 copper. I've treated people in worse positions who eventually sorted themselves out." He shrugged. I have more room than I need and more food than I can eat before it spoils. It costs me nothing." That last part was not quite true. It would cost him something if Vorak came looking, but he said it anyway. "I am not a woman who accepts charity," Murbul said carefully. "It's not charity. In exchange, you can help me with the supply runs to the coastal villages. My pack horse pulled up lame last month and I've been managing on foot, which is slower than I'd like." He met her eyes. "You look like someone who can carry a heavy pack without complaint." The ghost of that almost smile again. "You are an unusual man, Jasper Quinn." "Frequently," he agreed. She stayed. The first week was careful. She slept in the refectory. He slept in the monk's cell he'd converted into a sleeping room. They moved around each other with a studied, deliberate politeness that was really two people measuring the territory of a shared space and deciding where the lines were. She was not used to being looked after, and he was not used to being looked at least not by someone whose attention he noticed the way he noticed hers. There was a quality to Murbul's gaze that made him very aware of where his hands were. She was stronger than him by a large margin and made no pretense of it, which he found he liked. She carried the supply packs without effort. She could move the stone-capped barrel that normally took him and a wedge and most of an afternoon. When a section of the south wing's roof began to sag dangerously after a hard rain, she climbed up and pulled the damaged section free and replaced the stone supports with a precise, economical efficiency that left him simply watching from below. "Where did you learn that?" he asked when she came down. "Building things is survival," she said simply. "My grandfather taught me. He said a bonecrusher who cannot repair what they break is not worth the name." He helped where he could with the things that required careful hands. The joint between two support stones needed specific mortar and specific packing, and she held the weight while he worked, and neither of them talked about the fact that they were very close, or that her arm was braced above his head, or that he could feel the warmth coming off her even in the cold sea air. The supply run started that second week. The coastal villages strung along the bottom of the cliffs were reached by a steep switchback path, and Jasper made the rounds every 4 or 5 days, carrying medicines, splints, compresses, tooth-pulling tools, and the various tinctures and dried compounds he prepared in the monastery kitchen. The villagers were fisher folk and kelp harvesters, hard-bitten and not especially welcoming to strangers, and several of them were visibly unsettled by Murbul the first time she accompanied him. A man named Seaver, who ran the trades at the bottom of the cliff path, looked at her for a long time and then looked at Jasper. "Brought yourself some protection." "She's helping with the supplies," Jasper said. "Murbul, this is Seaver. He owes me a debt he pays in dried fish, which suits me fine." "Does she speak?" Seaver asked, still looking at her. "I do," Murbul said pleasantly. "I also hear everything you've said about me since I came within 20 feet, which is impressive for a man of your age. Your hearing has obviously not gone yet." Seaver blinked. Then he laughed, a short, surprised bark. "Fair enough." It went like that in most of the villages. A wariness that she met with the kind of direct, blunt dignity that people who expected prejudice and refused to perform for it tended to use, and which Jasper found himself admiring unreservedly. She did not soften herself. She did not apologize for existing. She stood there in her tooled amber leather and her copper-buckled belt and her ivory tusks, and she looked at you until you remembered your manners. By the end of the second week, she was carrying twice his pack and had already been asked to help mend a boat hull and had done it, and 3 of the fishing families would wave at her on sight. He watched her move through those villages and thought about loneliness in a specific, pressing way he usually kept at a distance. The nights were the thing he hadn't prepared for. After the first week, she moved from the refectory to the smaller room at the far end of the south wing, closer to the kitchen's heat. This meant their paths crossed more in the evenings, and the evenings were when the monastery's silence got very large and very full of things neither of them said. She had a habit of sitting near the hearth with one knee drawn up, staring into the fire, and he had a habit of working late at the preparation table nearby. and so they were often in the same room with the fire between them and the sound of the sea outside. And sometimes they talked, and sometimes they didn't. And both things were comfortable in a way that unsettled him, because he had not expected it to be comfortable at all. She told him about her grandfather in pieces and over time. The old man had been a war leader in the Second Greyville conflict, 40 years back, and had brought his clan through the final treaty years with their land mostly intact through a combination of ferocity and an unexpectedly sophisticated understanding of human negotiating tactics. He had taught Murbul to fight, to build, to read contracts, and to assess the character of a man in the first 5 minutes of conversation. "What did he say to look for?" Jasper asked one evening. "He said watch a man's hands when he's frustrated," she said. "If they close, he's the kind who hits. If they open, he's the kind who thinks." Jasper looked at his own hands spread on the preparation table. "And the groom," a long pause, "closed," he nodded. She looked at him with a directness that was by now familiar but never entirely comfortable. "Your hands open," she said. It should have been a simple observation. It was not quite the way she said it. He went back to grinding the compound in the mortar and didn't say anything, and the fire popped between them. He told her about himself in pieces too, because it seemed only fair. The boat, the ant, the years of learning the trade. The way he had drifted from town to town, always useful, never quite needed, which was not the same thing, and he'd known it for a long time. The monastery at Crestholm had been the longest he'd stayed anywhere in 4 years. "Why here?" she asked. "The coast," he said. "I grew up near water, something about the sound of it," he shrugged. "And the villages genuinely needed someone. Nearest town with a proper healer is 2 days' ride inland. People were suffering from things that shouldn't cause suffering." He paused. It mattered, being somewhere that mattered. Murbul was looking at him steadily. "You are a man who needs to matter," she said. "Not unkindly. I suppose I am. That is not a weakness." He looked up. "It is only weakness if you let the need make you desperate," she said. "You are not desperate. You are simply honest about what you want from the world." She turned back to the fire. "I find it refreshing." He sat with that for a while, in the big monastery silence with the sea going on below, and thought that no one had said anything that right about him in a very long time. 3 weeks in, Vorik found the cliff road. Jasper was returning from the southern villages alone. Murbul had stayed to finish recaulking the west window, when he came around the last switchback and found 2 horsemen waiting at the gate. They were Orc outriders, Ashbone clan markings on their shields, and they were looking at him the way men look at someone they've decided is an obstacle. "You, healer." The nearer one was lean and sharp-faced with a scar across one cheek. "We're looking for a woman, Orc woman, dressed for ceremony, traveling alone. Have you seen her?" Jasper set down the near pack with the unhurried ease of someone who had nothing to hide. "I treat a lot of people," he said. "Can you describe her more specifically?" "Tall, green, clan Bonecrusher, goes by Murbul." "Murbul," Jasper said thoughtfully, as if turning the name over. "No, can't say the name means anything. Though I don't always get names, people come in for treatment, I see to them, they go." The scarred outrider studied him. "You're alone up here." "For the most part. It's a working monastery, or it was. I use the south wing as my base." He picked the pack back up. "Is there a reward posted? If she comes to me seeking treatment, I could send word." A pause. The outrider looked at his companion. Some silent calculation passed between them. "If you see her," the scarred one said, "send word to the Ashbone post at Greyville Crossing. There is a coin in it." "Noted," Jasper said. He waited until they'd ridden back down the cliff road and were genuinely out of sight, and then he went inside and told Murbul exactly what had been said. She was sitting very still on the work table with her arms crossed. Her jaw was set. There was something behind her eyes that was not quite fear and not quite anger, and was actually, he realized, grief, the particular grief of someone whose freedom cost other people something. "You lied for me," she said. "I provided some carefully incomplete information," he said. "I have a healer's relationship to truth. I tell the part of it that does the most good." She was looking at him with that quality of attention again, the kind that made him very aware of everything about himself. "Vorak himself will come next," she said. "He will not send outriders a second time. He'll come personally. He's that kind of man." "When?" "A week, maybe 2. He'll want to be certain of the ground first." Jasper nodded slowly. "Then we have a week or 2 to think about this properly." "Jasper." She said his name with a weight he hadn't heard in it before. "If he comes here, it becomes your problem. He will not hesitate to make it dangerous for you." "He's already made it my problem," Jasper said. "He sent 2 of his men to my gate. That was his choice, not yours." He met her eyes steadily. "I'm not asking you to leave." She breathed in slowly. Something shifted in her face. Something softened fractionally, like stone exposed to enough rain eventually smooths. "You are a very stubborn man," she said. "I prefer committed," he said, and she made a sound that was almost a laugh. That evening they sat closer to the fire than usual, and Jasper told her about the old monastery's layout, the 3 towers, the collapsed east wing, the passages between the south buildings, the places that could be watched from and the places that couldn't. He had learned the building the way he learned most things, thoroughly, because he believed in being prepared. Murbul listened with the focused attention of someone accustomed to planning under pressure, and twice she asked questions that were so tactically precise they startled him. "You've done this before," he said. "Planned a defense." "I defended the Bonecrusher steadings for 3 years after my father died," she said. "We were border territory. There are always people willing to test border territory." A pause. "I was 22. He did the math. She was roughly his age, perhaps a year or 2 younger, 29 or 30. He found himself wanting to know the exact number for no practical reason at all. "Who taught you?" he asked. "My grandfather's old war captain," she said. "A woman named Gretka." She had one eye and absolutely no patience for excuses. A genuine smile, brief and bright. "She was the best person I have ever known." It was the first time he'd seen the full smile. It was extraordinary. The way it changed her whole face, the amber eyes went warm and the tusks caught the light, and she looked, for just that moment, entirely unguarded, and Jasper felt something shift in the territory of his chest that he'd been carefully not examining. He looked at the fire instead. "She sounds remarkable." She was. "She died 3 winters ago. After that, my clan's elders decided we needed to secure the alliance with Ashbone, and that I was the most efficient means of doing so." Murbul's voice was flat again, protective. "It was not an unreasonable calculation. It was simply one I refused to be the answer to." "You were right to refuse." She looked at him. "You have a right to your own life," he said simply. "That seems obvious to me. I know it isn't obvious to everyone, and I know it's easy for me to say when I'm not the one whose clan's survival might depend on a treaty, but it's still true. You have a right to your own life." The fire, the sea, the silence between them, which was full of something now. "Jasper," she said very quietly. "Thank you," he nodded. He didn't trust what his voice would do with the moment, so he let it pass without words, and poured them each a measure of the small amount of apple liquor he'd been given by a grateful patient in the South Village, and they sat with that through the rest of the evening. The days turned into a month. He stopped counting with the intention of stopping her. He was not sure when that happened. At some point the expectation of her presence in the mornings had become simply the shape of the morning, the sound of her moving around in the kitchen before he was fully awake, the smell of the particular tea she'd started making with the dried herbs from his supplies, the way she had arranged her boots by the south door without asking, and the boots being there now was the sign that she was home. Home. He turned the word over and let it lie. She had started helping him prepare medications. Not with any instruction. She'd simply watched him for 2 weeks, and then one morning had been doing it when he came in, quick and precise and asking the right questions. Her hands were massive compared to his, dexterous in a way that surprised him until it didn't anymore. She had the same quality of attention in this as in everything, total, unhurried, serious. "You have a gift for this," he told her one afternoon, when she'd separated a compound more cleanly than he typically managed. "I have a gift for paying attention," she said. "The task just needs it." Most people find precise work frustrating when they're as physically strong as you are. She looked at him with the slight tilt of her head that was her version of an amused expression. What an interesting thing to assume. Is it wrong? Yes, strength is a tool, not a personality, he smiled. That's a very good line. I have many good lines, she said, and went back to the compound with the particular satisfaction of someone who had just scored a point and knew it. He was not imagining the current between them. He had tried to imagine that he was imagining it and had eventually given up, because he was a man who dealt in facts, and the fact was that when she handed him something and their fingers touched, he noticed it the way you notice a burn, immediate and lasting, and her eyes had been holding his a half-second longer than necessary for weeks now, and she moved differently in rooms where he was than in rooms where he wasn't. He'd seen it from doorways. The subtle change in how she held herself when she knew he was watching. The question was what to do with it. He was not a man who presumed, particularly not with a woman who had just run from a man who had presumed very thoroughly. The last thing Murbul Bonecrusher needed was another man deciding things on her behalf. So he held the knowledge of the current between them carefully, like a small thing that could easily shatter, and waited. She did not make him wait as long as he'd expected. It was a morning in late autumn, the 6th week, a bright hard-edged morning with a genuine frost on the stone and the sea visible from the high windows as a flat hammered silver. He was at the preparation table and she came in from the courtyard, having gone out to check the gate latch she'd been worried about, still cold from outside, and she came to the table to warm her hands near the candles, and her shoulder was very close to his, and she said without looking at him, "Are you going to keep pretending?" He stopped what he was doing. "Pretending what?" "That this is only shelter." She looked at him then sideways, the amber eyes direct and certain. "That you don't feel what I feel." The monastery was quiet around them. The sea was its own enormous sound beyond the walls. Jasper set down the pestle. "No," he said, "I'm not going to keep pretending." She turned to face him fully, all that height and certainty and warmth, and he looked up at her without any attempt to be something other than what he was, a man of middling height and careful hands who felt this like a tide coming in, unstoppable and right. "Good," she said, and she kissed him. She had to bend to reach him, which she did with no ceremony or self-consciousness, just a hand coming to rest on his jaw and her mouth finding his, warm and deliberate and certain. And Jasper brought his hands up to her arms and felt the solid, real, beautiful weight of her presence, and kissed her back with everything he'd been keeping quiet for 6 weeks. When they separated, she was watching him with the amber eyes soft for once, softened into something he recognized as want, but also something that went considerably deeper than want. "I have wanted to do that," she said quietly, "for approximately 4 weeks. "Why did you wait?" he asked, and his voice was rough. "Because I wanted to be certain you wanted me to." A pause. "And not simply that you would accept me because you are kind. I do not want kindness, I want wanting." He brought his hand up to her face, her jaw, the smooth warmth of her green dark cheek, and she turned into it fractionally, a barely perceptible lean. "I want you," he said. "I have been wanting you and trying to be respectable about it for over a month." The smile again, full and bright. "Then we have both been very patient," she said, "and I think we can afford to stop." The morning became a different kind of morning, and the frost on the stone outside did not matter at all. Everything after that was cleaner and more complicated simultaneously, the way love always managed to be. Cleaner because the thing between them was named, and they did not have to be careful of it anymore. They could simply be what they were, two people who had independently concluded that the other was remarkable, and were now permitted to act on it. More complicated because naming it made Murbul's situation real in a new way. She was not a temporary guest who could drift away into something else. She was someone he loved, and she was in genuine danger, and Vorak was still out there and would eventually come. She slept in his room now, warm and enormous and real in the narrow monk's bed, which they solved by her pulling the bed against the wall and sleeping against the stone and him tucked in against her chest. and it was the best sleeping arrangement of his life, which was information he filed away with great fondness. She smelled of sea air and the dried herbs from the preparation table, and something under both of those that was simply her, warm and deep. He had not understood until recently that loneliness had a specific physical texture, and that its absence was something you felt in your body before your mind caught up. She ran her thumb along the line of his shoulder before she slept, and he thought, I would do a great deal to keep this. He was aware, in the way he was always aware of useful facts, that this was exactly what made Vorik dangerous. Vorik came on a morning in early winter. Jasper had gone down to the south village alone. Murbul had stayed to reinforce the east passage, and was returning up the cliff path with an empty pack and a head full of pleasant, ordinary things, when he came around the last switchback and found not 2 outriders but 7, waiting at the gate, and at their center a man on a gray horse who was so obviously the brother that Jasper knew him without introduction. Vorik Ashbone was as large as any orc Jasper had met, built heavy through the chest and jaw, with a face that had been hard to begin with, and had been finished by something personal and resentful. He wore a warlord's riding leathers, dark and well-made, and he sat his horse the way men sit a horse when they want you to understand that the horse is the least valuable thing they're prepared to deploy. Healer, he said when Jasper was close enough. His comment was precise. My scouts tell me you lied to them. 6 weeks ago, they asked you about a woman. You said you knew nothing. Jasper set down the empty pack. Your scouts asked me if someone had come to me for treatment. I told them no one by that description had come for treatment. That was true. A game of words. A careful answer to a careless question. Jasper looked up at him without hostility and without flinching. What exactly are you here for, Vorik Ashbone? The woman, the Bonecrusher woman, she is here. If she is, Jasper said, she came of her own will and has stayed of her own will. She is not a possession I'm holding. Vorik's jaw tightened. She made an agreement. She was sold into one, Jasper said. There is a difference. Something very dangerous moved through Vorik's face. I'm not here to debate politics with a traveling medicine man, he said. I am here to retrieve what belongs to the Ashbone clan. My brother's honor, your brother's honor, Jasper said, is between your brother and the world. A woman who does not wish to be married is not a debt your brother is owed. The silence that followed was of the absolute variety. Vorik dismounted. He was fully 2 heads taller than Jasper and built like a siege weapon, and the 6 outriders behind him were watching with the professional attentiveness of men who expected to be useful shortly. Jasper did not move. He was aware that he was in a situation where the outcome depended on whether he could project enough certainty that Vorik would pause to consider consequences. Vorik struck him as a man who had rarely needed to consider consequences, which made this harder. Where is she? Vorik said, close now. Not a question. I'm here. Murbul's voice came from the gate, which she had opened silently at some point during the conversation. She stood in the archway in her amber leather and her copper-buckled belt, and she was not afraid. Jasper could see that clearly, the way he could see everything about her clearly now. She was not afraid, she was angry, and she had come out because she'd heard everything and had made a decision. Vorik looked at her. Something complicated moved across his face, the anger, and under the anger something that might have been hurt, or might have been wounded pride, which was not the same thing but often looked similar. You will come back, he said. The Alliance. The Alliance is not my responsibility, Murbul said. The Bonecrusher elders made an agreement without my consent. That is their failure, not my obligation. She came forward until she was standing beside Jasper, and Jasper was acutely aware of the 7 outriders and the way they were watching. I am not returning, Vorik. I am telling you this directly, as is my right. Find another way to secure your plateau rights. There is no other way, Vorik said. The treaty requires. Then renegotiate the treaty. Her voice was flat and absolute. I am not a means. I am Murbul Bonecrusher, and I am standing on my own 2 feet, and I am telling you that this ends here. Vorik looked at Jasper with an expression that was looking for a place to put the blame. You have put ideas in her head. She arrived with ideas fully formed, Jasper said. I provided porridge. One of the outriders made a sound. Vorak silenced him with a look. Then the moment went sideways in the way bad moments do, fast and without warning. Vorak reached for Murbul's arm, the grab of a man who had been told no by someone he decided didn't have the authority to say it, and Murbul caught his wrist with a speed and surety that stopped him completely. But in the same instant the outriders moved, and two of them had Jasper before he could do anything useful, and a blade was at his throat. Everything stopped. Murbul had gone perfectly still. She was still holding Vorak's wrist. Her eyes were on Jasper. Jasper was being held with his arms pulled back and a blade touching the side of his neck, and he was trying to breathe evenly and give her something steady to look at. "Let him go," Murbul said, low and dangerous. "Let go of my wrist," Vorak said. "If I let go of your wrist," Murbul said, "your man's blade moves, you know it, I know it." A pause, the cliff wind was pushing at everyone. "Let the healer go," Murbul said. "He has nothing to do with this. This is between you and me. Him you will not touch." "Then come willingly," Vorak said, "and we have no quarrel with the healer." Jasper could see what she was deciding. He could see it in her face, in the stillness of her, the amber eyes moving between Vorak and him. He knew before she moved what she was going to do. "Murbul," he said, "don't." "You are not in a position to tell me anything," she said, and there was something in her voice that was terrifying in how full it was, terrifying because it was not resignation. It was fury and love compacted into a single decision. "Let him go," she said to Vorak again. "I will walk with you. I will not fight your outriders or make you a scene on this road. I will walk with you if you release him now unharmed." "Murbul," Jasper's voice came out rough and wrong. "Don't do this." "He is a healer," she said, still looking at Vorak, ignoring Jasper, which was worse than if she'd shouted. "He treats people who would otherwise suffer. He is the only one on this coast who does it. Whatever quarrel Ashbone has with me, leaving this coast without its healer is not a trade that benefits your clan's reputation." A pause. "Vorak, I know you are not a stupid man. Let him go." Vorak was looking at her, and Jasper, watching, saw something he hadn't expected. Vorak was thinking, not just performing the calculation of force, but actually thinking. "You care for this man," Vorak said slowly. "That is not your concern." "It is my concern," Vorak said, "because it tells me something." He was quiet for a moment. "Release him," he said to the outriders. The blade left Jasper's neck. The grip on his arms loosened. He stayed where he was because moving suddenly seemed inadvisable. "You would offer yourself for a human healer," Vorak said to Murbul. "A man you've known 2 months." "I would offer myself for this man," Murbul said. "Yes." Vorak looked at her for a long time with an expression Jasper couldn't fully read. Then he looked at Jasper, then back at her. "My brother's honor," he said again, but it came out differently this time. "Your brother's honor is worth more than a wife who does not want to be there," Murbul said. "You know that, Vorak. Whatever you think of me, you know that." Something cracked very slightly in Vorak's face. Not surrender, something more honest than that. "The clan elders will not accept a broken treaty," he said. "And I will send a letter to your clan elders," Murbul said, "written in my own hand, taking the blame entirely onto myself and releasing the Bonecrusher elders from responsibility for my choice. The treaty will be broken by me, personally, which means Ashbone's grievance is with me and not with a clan. That protects your plateau rights legally, because a broken treaty through personal defection returns all parties to their prior holdings under the Greyville Codes." A pause. "I have read the Greyville Codes, Vorak. I read them the week before the ceremony." Another silence. Vorak stared at her. "You planned this." "I planned for the eventuality," she said. "Yes." Vorak breathed out through his nose, long and controlled, and then he did something Jasper had not expected. He laughed, short and not especially warm, but a genuine laugh. "You are a remarkable woman, Murbul Bonecrusher," he said. There was real respect in it, unwilling and arrived at through being outmaneuvered, which was perhaps the most honest kind of respect. "I know," she said. Vorak remounted his horse. "The letter," he said. "Send it within the fortnight." "You'll have it within the week," she said. He looked at Jasper one more time. "Take care of her," he said, and there was no mockery in it. "She is considerable." He turned the gray horse. The outriders fell in. They rode back down the cliff road and around the first switchback and out of sight, and Jasper listened to the sound of the hooves diminishing until there was only the wind and the sea. Then Murbul's hands were on his face, checking, turning his head to look at the side of his neck where the blade had rested, and he let her do it because his legs were only somewhat reliable at the moment. "You're all right," she said. She was pressing very carefully at the side of his neck with her fingertips. "No cut. It didn't break the skin." "I know," he said. "I can tell the difference between a cut and a threat." "Jasper." She pulled his face up to look at her. Her eyes were very bright, too bright, the anger and the fear coming down from wherever she'd compressed them. I am sorry you were in that position." "You offered yourself," he said. "You offered yourself for me." "Yes, no hesitation. Murbul, if he had taken you back, he didn't. But if he had, you were willing to—" "Yes," she said again, simply. "I was willing. You are—" She stopped. Her voice had gone rough in a way he had not heard from her before. She was not a woman who easily showed this. "You matter more to me than my freedom. I know what that costs to say. I am saying it anyway." A long breath. "Do not make me say it again for some time. It is an expensive thing to say." He brought both hands up and held her wrists where her hands still framed his face. "You are not going to have to say it again," he said, "because I'm going to spend a significant portion of my remaining life making sure you never have reason to." She looked at him, the amber eyes. Then she pulled him in and held him, massive arms, real and solid and enormous and right. And Jasper pressed his face against her chest and breathed her in and let himself shake for a few seconds because the situation had earned it. And she held him without saying anything, her chin on the top of his head, and the sea went on below them, and the winter light was the color of old silver, and none of that mattered at all compared to the fact of this. Her arms, her heartbeat. This woman who had blown into his life like a storm off the water and who had just offered everything she was to keep him safe. He held on for a long time. She let him. The letter to the Ashbone clan elders was written at the kitchen table over 2 evenings, Murbul composing it in the formal old clan tongue with a steadiness that Jasper watched quietly from across the table. He brought tea. He did not offer to help unless asked. She was not a woman who needed to be rescued from her own competent decisions, and he had learned that the best thing he could do in these moments was simply be present and useful. She was asked, once, "How do you say personal and deliberate choice in a way that sounds legally unambiguous but doesn't read as hostile?" He thought about it. "Considered and willful election," he offered. "It's formal without being aggressive." She tried it in the clan tongue, nodded, wrote it down, and she reached across the table without looking up and put her hand over his for just a moment, the warm press of it, acknowledgement and warmth compressed into a gesture. He thought about that gesture for considerably longer than was strictly necessary. Winter came in properly, the cold off the Chevril Sea cutting and persistent, and the monastery south wing proved admirably suited for waiting it out thick stone walls, the deep kitchen hearth, a supply of peat and driftwood, and the oil lamps they kept going in the preparation room. Jasper made his supply rounds every week regardless of weather, sometimes with Murbul and sometimes alone, and the villages along the cliff became genuinely accustomed to seeing her. An old Seaver at the trading post began keeping a specific shelf of goods he thought might interest her, which she pretended to be indifferent to and was visibly not. She was making a place in the world, quietly and in her own way, and Jasper watched it with a specific joy. She had, it turned out, a dry and devastating sense of humor that emerged most reliably at his expense, and that he absolutely loved. She could do an uncannily accurate impression of his particular tone of professional understatement, which she deployed whenever he said something obvious as if it were profound. She was a genuinely terrible cook for anything that required delicacy of timing. She either got impatient or got interested in something else. But she made a remarkable simple broth from bone and root vegetables that she knew from the Bonecrusher steadings, thick and deep-flavored, and she made it whenever he came in cold from a long supply run without being asked. He noticed that. He noticed all of it. There was a particular evening in the deep of winter, the sea frozen in its coves and the cliff path treacherous with ice, when they were confined to the monastery by a storm that had been going for 2 days. The preparations were done, the supplies were sorted, there was nothing medically urgent, and so they sat by the fire and Jasper told her about the constellations he'd learned from sailors, and she told him about the Orc navigational stars, which were different names for the same sky. And at some point they were lying on the floor by the hearth because the angle was better for looking at the ceiling pretending it was the sky, which was not logically consistent but felt right. And her shoulder was under his head and his hand was in hers. "What do you want?" she said, at some point in the dark warm fire-lit quiet. "Not now, not this winter. What do you want from the long run of your life?" He thought about it honestly. "I want to keep doing what I do," he said, "treating people who need it in places that don't have enough help. I want to stay near the water." A pause. "I want what I've had these past few months, more or less. Work that matters, a place that's mine." Another pause, smaller. "Someone to share it with." "Someone specific?" she asked into the fire-warm dark. "Yes," he said, "very specific." A long quiet. "I have never had a home," she said then. "In the sense of a place that was mine and chose to be mine. The Bonecrusher steadings were my obligation. This here is the first place I have been where I stayed because I wanted to." She paused. "You are the first person in a long time who has given me the space to want things." "What do you want?" he asked. She was quiet for a long time. "This," she said finally, simple as that. "I want this." He turned his head and she turned hers, and in the firelight her face was the most beautiful thing he'd ever been this close to, the amber eyes dark and warm, the curves of her tusks pale, her jaw and brow and the wide lovely lines of her face all wholly and specifically hers, and he said very quietly, "Then stay." "I am staying," she said. "I have been staying. I know." He lifted his hand and touched her face, the line of her cheek, the way he had come to know every feature, the way you know a landscape you love. "I just wanted to say it." She turned into his hand. Then she pulled him up and he went willingly and they were very close and she said low and sure, "Jasper Quinn." "Yes. I want you to know," she said, "that I am choosing you, not from necessity, not from gratitude, because you are the best person I have ever known." The fire, the storm outside, the vast dark of the Chevreul Sea beyond the walls. He said, "I am choosing you too, every day, entirely." She kissed him, and the stone floor was hard beneath them, and the fire was warm, and he didn't notice either thing. Spring came slowly to the cliff, the way it always came to coastal places, the sea changing color first, going from the flat pewter of winter to something with more blue in it, and then the plants on the cliff face sending up their first cautious growth, and finally, the cliff path losing its ice and the villages below becoming busier with boats and trade. Word came up the cliff with the spring, as word always did, through the fishing families and the traders and the simple fact that people talked. Specifically, the word was this. The Grayville Crossing had a new market day in the calendar, a spring trade gathering that the border villages attended, and the Ashbone clan would have a presence there for the first time in several years, which meant there was a reasonable chance that Murbul's letter to the clan elders had done what she'd intended it to do, and the Ashbone Bonecrusher situation had been resolved through proper legal channels. But along with that word came another, less comfortable piece. The Bonecrusher elders, her clan's remaining leadership, 2 old men named Harak and Jevin, had gotten wind of where Murbul had ended up and were making noises about shame and obligation that the fishing families reported with the uncomfortable vagueness of people who didn't want to be the bearers of genuinely bad news. Murbul heard this and set her jaw and said nothing for a while. Jasper let her have the silence. Then he made the broth this time badly, getting the timing wrong so it needed a lot of adjustment, and he put a bowl in front of her and sat across from her and said, "Tell me what you're thinking." "I'm thinking," she said, "that it will not end until someone ends it in public." What do you mean? The Ashbourne situation is resolved your way through letters and law, and it worked, and I am grateful for your advice on the phrasing. She met his eyes. But the Bonecrusher elders are a different problem. They will never accept a private resolution. They need to be faced in public, at something like this spring gathering. A pause. They need to see me standing on my own ground in my own name, and they need to see that I am not ashamed and not hidden and not their obligation to resolve. What does that look like? He asked. It looks like showing up to the Grayville Crossing market gathering. She said it as if it were simple. With you, he was quiet. With me. With you, she looked at him steadily. They will try to make it about you, about the shame of a Bonecrusher woman staying with a human, about what that means for clan honor. A pause. I want to be clear with you about what you would be walking into. How much trouble, he said. Harek in particular will be ugly about it. A pause. He is old and afraid of exactly the kind of thing we represent, and he will not be kind. Jasper nodded. He thought about the kind of man he was: healer, loner, a man of quiet habits and careful hands who had found something extraordinary and was not prepared to hide it. He thought about Murbul at his gate in the rain, half-ruined and fierce. He thought about her arms holding him after the outriders, her voice saying he matters more than my freedom. I'll pack a bag, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. You don't have to, she said. I can go alone. I am not asking you to, Murbul. He met her eyes. I know you don't need me there. You can handle 2 old men and a public gathering by yourself. I'm coming because I want to be there. Because where you are is where I want to be. Do you understand the difference? The amber eyes, the fire, the early spring light through the high windows. Yes, she said very softly. I understand the difference. Good, he stood up. Now eat the broth before it gets cold. I know I got the salt wrong, but it's still nutritious. She laughed the full laugh, rare and bright, and picked up the bowl, and he watched her and thought, I would stand in front of a great deal more than 2 disapproving old men for the sight of her laughing. The Grayville Crossing market gathering was 4 days' travel from the Cliff Monastery, inland through the border country, where the coastal hills flattened into the high plateau grassland. They went on foot for the first day, until they reached the village of Penmarsh, where Jasper had a long-standing arrangement with a stable master whose wife he'd treated for a bad joint 3 seasons back, and they borrowed a stout cob horse for the remaining 3 days. The horse, whose name was Fig, was entirely unbothered by Murbul, which she seemed to take as a personal compliment. They traveled well together. They always had, but over roads and through border country with the spring coming in around them. It was a different kind of easy and real. 2 people who had learned each other thoroughly and found the learning worthwhile. She pointed out things on the plateau she knew. Particular grasses, the old earthworks of the Grayville Treaty boundary, a ruined watchpost she'd been stationed at once in her defense years. He pointed out the medicinal plants pushing through the spring ground, yarrow and feverfew, and the first cautious growth of comfrey along the stream banks. On the second night they camped in the open because there was no inn within useful distance, and he built the fire and she gathered the wood, and they ate a hard journey meal and lay out under the early spring sky, her arm around him and his head on her shoulder, and she showed him the Orc navigational stars again, this time with the actual sky above them. There, she said, pointing. The grandmother, that star, she finds north. That one, the sailors call her the fixed eye. Same star, different name. A pause, same sky. He turned his head and looked up at her face in the dark, the profile against the enormous night, and felt the thing he'd been feeling for months now with a fresh and undiminished intensity. She was looking at the stars. Her jaw was strong and her tusks were pale in the darkness, and she was holding him with a hand that could break stone and was being careful with it, the way she was always careful with him, the specific carefulness of someone who understood the difference between their strength and what a situation required. Murbul, he said, I love you. She stopped looking at the stars. She looked down at him. I know, she said, and then quieter, rougher, I love you. I have been wanting to say it for longer than is reasonable. He turned and pressed his face against her jaw, the warm, smooth skin of it, the line where jaw met neck, and she held him, and the stars were above them, and the plateau grass moved in the night wind around them, and it was right in the way very few things in his life had been simply and entirely right. In Orc custom, she said, after a long, warm quiet, saying it is the claiming. We don't have elaborate binding ceremonies as the humans do. You say the word in full honesty and witness of the sky, and it is done. It is a covenant. He lifted his head to look at her. You said it. I did, deliberately. I am always deliberate, she said, with that quality of certainty that was one of the things he loved most about her. He took her face in both his hands, and she let him. Murbul Bonecrusher, he said, with full honesty and with the sky above them as witness. I love you. I claim you as mine if Orc custom will have a human man at his word. Orc custom will, she said. Her eyes were very bright. And I claim you as mine, Jasper Quinn, under the grandmother star and the full honest sky. They lay back on the plateau grass with the enormity of what they'd done settling around them like something that had always been waiting to be true, and Jasper laughed quietly, involuntarily, because he was enormously happy, and happiness had always come out of him as laughter when it reached a certain point. What? She asked. Nothing, he said. He laughed again. I'm happy. I'm simply very happy. She pulled him tighter and pressed her lips to his hair. Good, she said into the dark. So am I. The Grayville Crossing Market was everything a spring border market was supposed to be. Enormous, loud, chaotic, and various. Stalls and tents spread out from the old stone crossing in every direction, selling everything from grain to horses, to worked metal to smoked fish to cloth to medicinal compounds. And the crowd was the full range of border country humanity and Orc kind, mingled with the businesslike ease of people who set aside the harder politics when there was money to be made. Jasper and Murbul arrived in the late morning of the market's first day. They tied Fig at the stable stalls and walked in together, and Jasper noticed the looks immediately, people who saw her height and her markings and his relative ordinariness, and spent a moment computing the picture they presented. And he noticed that Murbul noticed the looks and met every single one of them the same way, with a flat, direct, entirely unbothered amber gaze that cost the viewer more than it cost her. He kept his hand in hers. It was not a small hand. It was warm and real, and he kept it. The Ashbone clan stall was near the center of the market, flying their colors, manned by two traders he didn't know, and a young woman who looked like an administrative official. No sign of Voruk, which was either good or carefully arranged. He nodded in their direction when they walked past, and the Ashbone traders looked at Murbul with recognition, and then with a kind of quick, deliberate neutrality that he read as, "The letter arrived, the elders accepted it, we have been told to let this lie." Good. The Bonecrusher presence was smaller, a single tent at the market's edge, and two old men sitting in front of it on carved chairs that had clearly been brought specifically for the purpose of looking weighty and official. Harak was the larger of the two, gray-haired and heavy-jawed, with the look of a man who had been significant once and kept the furniture of significance around him to compensate. Jevon was smaller and quieter, his face more thoughtful. They saw Murbul coming from 50 feet away. Murbul did not slow down. Jasper kept pace with her, her hand in his. They stopped in front of the tent. Around them, the market continued its enormous noise, but the immediate vicinity had gone attentive. There were people close enough to see, and some of them had gone quiet to watch, because the body language of the moment was legible to anyone with eyes. "Murbul," said Harak. His voice was a performance of controlled disapproval. "You have shamed this clan." "Good morning, Harak," Murbul said pleasantly. "You look well, the chair suits you." His jaw tightened. "You left a sworn alliance, I left a sale," she said. "There is a difference. I have written to the Ashbone elders and taken full personal responsibility for the broken arrangement. Any legal consequence falls on me alone, not on the clan. If you had read the letter I also sent you, which I know you received, you would know this." "The letter," Harak said heavily, "is not the point." "What is the point, then?" His gaze moved to Jasper. The full weight of his disapproval, which was a significant weight, landed there. "This." Murbul's hand tightened around Jasper's, not in distress, in emphasis. "This," she said, "is Jasper Quinn. He is a healer, a man of character, and the person I have chosen to spend my life with, under the full sky and the grandmother star." She let that land, in the old custom, which even you cannot argue with, Harek, because it was good enough for our grandfather and it was good enough for everything that came before him. Harek stared at her, then at Jasper. Jasper looked back at him without flinching. He was aware that what he did in this moment mattered, and what he did was nothing aggressive, nothing defensive, nothing that apologized for existing. He simply stood there with her hand in his and let Harek look and waited. "He is human," Harek said. "He is mine," Murbul said, "and I am his. That is the entirety of what concerns you." The clan, Harek. Murbul's voice was not raised, but it became something that cut through the market noise the way cold water cuts through something warm. "I defended this clan's borders for 3 years after my father died. I buried 4 of our fighters, and I held the line at the Penmarsh crossing when we had 11 people against 40, and I did it because this clan was my people and I loved them. I still love them. But I am not their instrument. I am not a treaty provision or a debt to be paid, a pause that held everything. I am Murbul Bonecrusher, and I am standing in front of you under the open sky with the man I love, and I am telling you that this is my life and it is mine to live. If you can find no honor in that, then you have narrowed your understanding of honor considerably since my grandfather's day." Silence. The market going on around them. People watching. Jevin, the quieter elder, leaned toward Harek and said something in the clan tongue, low, that Jasper didn't catch. Harek's jaw worked. Some internal battle being fought with a considerable amount of old pride on both sides. Then Jevin stood up from his chair slowly, with the dignity of age, and he walked forward and he looked at Murbul, and then he looked at Jasper, and his eyes were shrewd and not unkind. "Your grandfather," Jevin said to Murbul, "married a woman who told him to his face that she would cut his hands off if he tried to own her, and he loved her for 50 years. A pause. "He would have liked your nerve." Murbul blinked, just once. "You," Jevin said to Jasper, "healer. Can you keep her safe?" Jasper considered the question with the honesty it deserved. "She could keep herself safe in a burning building with one hand behind her back," he said. "What I can do is make sure she never has to do it alone." A pause. "That I can promise." Jevin looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. One short, decisive nod, the nod of a man who had made a private judgment and was at peace with it. "Then that will do," Jevin said. Harek made a sound of disgust and looked away, but Jasper noticed he did not stand up. He did not make a further objection. He sat in his weighty chair and looked at the middle distance and communicated his displeasure to the air, which the air absorbed without complaint. It was not a blessing. It was not reconciliation. But it was the closing of a door, and the door had been closed in public, in full view of the Grayville crossing market, and that was what Murbul had needed. She stood in the spring light with her clan markings and her copper-buckled belt and her amber leather that had carried her through a winter's worth of living, and she was not afraid, and she was not ashamed, and Jasper was beside her with her hand in his, and the market noise was going on around them like the world approving, loudly and without particular attention, of a morning's good work. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Well," she said. "Well," he agreed. "That went reasonably. Better than reasonably. Jevin is a better man than I remembered." A pause. "Don't tell anyone I said that. Healer-patient confidentiality," he offered. "This is not a medical situation." "Healer's general discretion, then." She made a sound that was half a laugh, and then she looked at him with the full amber warmth of her eyes and said quietly, "Thank you for standing there." "I told you," he said. "I wanted to be there." She squeezed his hand once, the same emphasis as before, and he felt it through his whole arm and into his chest. They walked through the market for the rest of the morning. She drove a hard bargain for a set of copper rivets from a metalsmith in the western quarter, which she needed to repair the east window's outer frame, and Jasper found and purchased a specific dried compound he'd been unable to source all winter, which was cause for genuine celebration. They ate at one of the food stalls meat pastries of indeterminate filling but excellent quality, and sat on a low stone wall by the crossing and watched the market traffic, shoulder to shoulder, her shoulder comfortably higher than his, both of them warm in the spring light. A woman leading a cart horse slowed as she passed them, and looked at Murbul with the particular look of someone revising their initial impression, then offered a polite nod before moving on. An orc trader from the northern stalls came by to exchange a few words with Murbul in the clan tongue, and departed looking satisfied about something. A pair of children, one human, one orc, apparently attached to the same trader's family, stopped to stare at them without subtlety until an adult collected them. Jasper ate the last of his meat pastry and said, "I've been thinking about the East Tower." "Which problem specifically?" "The stairs. Half the risers are rotted through. If we replace them with stone, not mortared, laid dry, they'd hold and they'd be a lot faster to install." She considered this. "We'd need to source flat stone. There's a good quarry site 2 miles north of the cliff approach. I know the one, I've been past it. We could borrow Fig again." He'd accept it in good humor, she nodded. "In the spring when the path dries and the West Tower drainage needs clearing before the summer rains come." "I was thinking the same." He paused. "I was also thinking I should write to the Inland Medical Society about formally registering the monastery as a treatment station. It would give the arrangement more official weight. Potentially some supply support." She looked at him. "You are planning to stay?" "I am very much planning to stay." The amber eyes warm and direct. "As am I," she said. He reached over and took her hand again, there on the wall in the spring market light with the crossing and the crowd and the world going on around them, and she laced her fingers through his with the ease of someone who had decided that this was exactly where her hand belonged and intended to keep it there. She looked out at the market and he looked at her briefly, the way he caught himself looking at her whenever he had an unrestricted angle, the strong line of her jaw, the curve of her tusks catching the light, her hair loose today from its usual braid and moving slightly in the spring wind. She was extraordinary. She had arrived at his gate in the rain, desperate and fierce and going nowhere, and she had become, without particularly announcing it, the center of his life. "What are you looking at?" she said, still watching the market. "Something worth looking at," he said. She turned her head. The full smile, unhidden, the one that reached her eyes and changed her whole face and was entirely, specifically hers. "Flattery," she said. "Fact," he said. "I'm a healer, I deal in facts." She looked at him for a long moment, the warmth in her eyes deep and sure and permanent, the look of someone who had decided a thing fully and without reservation and was at peace with the deciding. "Let's go home," she said. The word in her voice in the spring light of the Grayville Crossing Market was the most beautiful thing he'd heard in his life. "Yes," he said. "Let's." They collected Fig from the stable and rode back through the border country in the generous spring light, the plateau grass going green around them, the grandmother star not yet visible in the afternoon sky, but there regardless, steady and fixed, the same star under a different name. And Jasper rode behind Murbul on the broad-backed cob with his arms around her waist and his face against the back of her shoulder, and thought about the shape of his life before, and the shape of it now and the clear. Enormous difference between the two. She had asked for one night's shelter in the rain at a gate she'd hit with her shoulder. She was still there in spring. She would be there in summer, and in the autumn after it, and in the winter with the sea frozen in its coves and the fire going in the hearth and the willow bark tea that tasted like bark, because it was bark, and the sound of the monastery settling around them at night like an old building getting comfortable with being a home. She would be there. He had never been so certain of anything. The Cliff Monastery welcomed them back the way good places welcome people home, with its own specific smell of sea air and old stone, and the remnant warmth in the kitchen hearth, and the herbs drying in the preparation room, and the boots at the south door. Murbul's boots, slightly larger than any space had been prepared for, settled beside his like they had always been there, because they had, for months now, and would be for as long as the stones held. He lit the fire. She unpacked the copper rivets and set them beside the preparation table for tomorrow. He put the kettle on, and she did not make the tea because he wanted to make it tonight, and she sat on the bench across the kitchen table and watched him with those amber eyes full of the warmth she used to be careful about showing. She didn't hide it anymore. "Tell me something," she said. "What do you want to know?" "Something I don't know yet. There must be something." He thought about it honestly. "I used to think," he said, "that being useful was enough, that if I kept people well, kept moving, kept working, that would be sufficient, a life of sufficient." He handed her the mug, the good clay one, warm in the hands. "I don't think that anymore." "No," she agreed. "You changed what I thought was enough," he said. "You made sufficient look like what it was, which was a very small word." She wrapped both hands around the mug. She was watching him with a steady, complete attention, the way she watched things she valued. "And what is the word now?" He looked at her in the hearthlight in their kitchen in the monastery on the cliff above the sea, and he said, "Full." Murbul smiled. Not the small, controlled, almost smile of the first weeks, not even the full, bright laugh smile that he loved. This was something else, something quieter and deeper, the smile of someone who had been through the hard part and recognized peace when it finally arrived. She put her hand out, palm up, across the table. He put his in it. Outside, the spring sea made its enormous living sound against the cliff, and the stars came out one by one above the water, and the grandmother star found her fixed place in the north, and the monastery held them, both of them together, in its old stone warmth. And that was how it was, and that was how it stayed.